Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my first guest of 2021, and he is certainly a famous name here in the Washington, D.C. area. That is Mr. Johnny Holliday, who's the longtime voice of the Maryland Terrapins. He's the former pregame host of the Washington Nationals. That's how I know him and he's also been a top 40 disc jockey all around the country. Mr. Holliday, thank you so much for joining me today, and Happy New Year.
Well, thank you, Billy. It's nice to be with you.
For sure. Well, first I wanted to start off with how you've been handling this pandemic, sir. I mean, obviously this is something we have never experienced in our lifetimes, and you've obviously seen everything, it seems like, just about over your illustrious career, but I'm sure you never expected to see a pandemic like this. So how you been handling this whole situation?
Well, I think, Billy, like everybody else, you do what you have to do. You have to do Zoom. You can't talk to anybody in person. You have to have the social distancing. You have to keep the hands washed and you have to wear the mask. It's been very, very difficult, but I'm not the only one. Everybody has to do the same thing. So you do the best you can and, hope this pandemic will end soon, sooner than later. And we can all get back to some kind of a sense of normalcy. Whether or not we'll ever get back to the way we were before this pandemic hit is anybody's guess. I don't know. But it's been a challenge. And I think myself and everybody else in the broadcasting world and field has done as good a job as they possibly can under rather unusual conditions.
For sure. And I want to, of course, talk about your big allegiance, which is to the Maryland Terrapins. You've been the voice of the team since 1979. Of course, Mr. Holliday, you've seen all kinds of things happen on the field covering Maryland. What are some of your favorite memories covering the Terps?
Well, I think the top one, Billy, would have to be the national championship game in 2002 in basketball when Maryland beat Indiana to win the national championship, first time ever for the men's basketball program. And the interesting thing about that team that year was they won 32 games. They lost only 4. They did not win the ACC tournament that year. But it was a team made up of guys that were just hard workers. They bought into Gary Williams' system. There was not one single McDonald's All-American on that team, which I think goes to prove that if you have the right players, the right mix, and the right focus with a coach that's a Hall of Fame coach like Gary Williams, a lot of good things can happen. That would be the all-time number one at the top of my list in basketball. And I think also in basketball, any time that Maryland beat Duke was always a big win. And in football, probably anytime we went to a bowl game would be a feather in the cap of all the players. And for me, the comeback went over Miami in the Orange Bowl in 1984, when Maryland was down at halftime, 31-0, and they came back to beat Miami, which at that time was the number 6 team in the country. That would have to rank up there as one of the all-time great games that I've done over the years.
For sure. And Mr. Holliday, you've covered a pretty interesting athlete back in the 80s, Mr. Len Bias, of course, who tragically passed away before he was able to start a career in the NBA. I mean, people talk about how if he had joined the Celtics, who knows how many more championships he would have won. And I know folks around here, Maryland fans, arguably say that he was a better college player than Michael Jordan. I mean, what perspective can you provide in covering Mr. Bias over his collegiate career?
Well, I think, like you say, had he gone on with the Boston Celtics to play, they would have won championship after championship, year after year, because of his presence and how good he was. But nobody will ever know. I mean, that's the sad thing about somebody's life being taken by the use of drugs at the age of only 21, just a couple of days after he had been drafted by the Celtics. But as far as him and Michael Jordan, there was always the comparison of who's the better player. And most of the box scores that I've been able to look up over the years, when Michael and Len Bias went head to head, Bias had the better numbers. He had more points, he had more rebounds, he had more assists. Now then Michael left early for the NBA and Len continued to play at Maryland. He was one of the most graceful players that I've ever seen. He was as good rebounding, he was as good running the floor as he was as a scorer. And everybody thinks of him as a scorer, but he was 6'8". He was a big, big kid. And he could play guard, he could play forward. He was just a magnificent, magnificent athlete. And I think all of us still to this very day wonder what could have happened had he stayed alive and had he not, so tragically passed away, and what an impact he would have had on the NBA. He would have been there for a long time, and the Boston Celtics would have had a lot of success with him playing.
Yeah, certainly we will never know, unfortunately. I wanted to also talk about Maryland's transition to the Big Ten. Mr. Holliday, I remember watching you, in some interviews back when this first transition happened from the ACC to the Big Ten. You were, a little skeptical at first. Of course, you have a lot of longtime friends of the ACC, from the coaches to the broadcasters, like our mutual friend Bill Roth from Virginia Tech. And now you've seen this transition to the Big Ten play out over the course of several years. What's your perspective on how you think this transition has gone for the Terps?
Well, I think that the Big Ten's the best conference in the country. I think it's evident by all the teams they have right now in basketball in the top 25. You got 8 teams listed, and there's 14 teams in the Big Ten, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It should be the Big 14. And Maryland is not among them. That's how tough the conference is in basketball. In football, it's even tougher with the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Wisconsins, the Michigans, the Michigan State. I had so many friends in the ACC for 35 years that I made. You had familiarity with the coaches. You had familiarity with not only the coaches, but also the different venues you went to, the SIDs, the players. And there was just so many different things that you could hang your hat on that you got used to and you were comfortable with. And all of a sudden that's taken away from me. So it did take me a little while to get adjusted. But people that made the decision to go to the Big Ten, a lot smarter than I am, and it's turned out to be a good move. I still miss all my friends. I still miss the friends that I made when you went to Virginia Tech, when you went to Virginia, Duke, Carolina, Wake State, all those schools. You'll never forget the friendships. You'll never lose those. But I think the Maryland fans got a little shortchanged when they can only go, you can drive to Rutgers, you can drive to Penn State. And that's basically it. The rest of the trips have got to be either overnight long drives or flights. And the good thing about the ACC, there was 5 or 6 games you could go to. You could even make it a day trip if you wanted to. You go to Virginia Tech, you see the game, you come back. You drive down to Carolina, see a game, come back the same night. So that's what I miss. But it was a good move, and I think we're all pretty comfortable with it now.
For sure. As a collegiate sports broadcaster, Mr. Holliday, I was wondering, do you think college football has a problem right now in terms of the lack of parity? I mean, you look at a team like Maryland, who has had a prestigious program. You've been there really all of those years. I mean, it seems like a team like them, a team like Virginia Tech, can't really seem to get over the hump. And you look at like the college football playoff, it seems like every year, at least the last 7, 8 years since it's been instituted, it's really been Alabama, it's been Ohio State, it's been Clemson, and then maybe you sprinkle in another team or two here and there. It just feels like the pool has gotten smaller for some of these prestigious programs like a Maryland to be able to really successfully compete for a championship. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's the school's problem. I mean, you can't fault Alabama for getting players to come there. Players want to go play for Alabama. They want to play for a national championship team. That's their prerogative. They can do that. And I think until schools like Maryland and the other schools get up to speed in recruiting, which I think Maryland is doing that. I think they've got the number 18 class in the country in football right now. It's up to the schools to get in the same plane. So I don't begrudge anything with these schools that keep going back and back to the championship game every year. If they're qualified to do it, then that's fine. The other schools have got to catch up, and you do that with recruiting. You do that with selling the university. You do that with selling the program that the area that you're living in, the Washington, Baltimore area. It has so many opportunities after school, and that's what schools have to concentrate on more: getting better players, getting more good student athletes, and then they'll be able to compete with the big guys.
For sure. Let's go now to the association I know you most well by, and that is you were the longtime pregame and postgame host of the Washington Nationals on Nats Extra on Masson. Again, I grew up with you and Mr. Knight handling the analysis of the games before and after for 11 years or so. What are your favorite memories covering the Nationals?
Oh my goodness, Billy, there's so many of them. 12 years is a long time. Certainly when they won the World Series, that has to be the topper right there. The no-hitters by Max Scherzer, the first game that Steven Strasburg pitched against the Pirates when he struck out like 14. Um, the Gio Gonzalez, the Ian Desmonds, the Ryan Zimmermans, just the tremendous relationship I had with the players and with managers like Davey Johnson and like with Dusty Baker and Jim Riggleman and Matty Acta, all these guys that we've maintained a friendship with these guys over the years. And to understand and to realize how difficult it is to be a player in the major leagues and what these guys have to sacrifice with their families, how tough it is to be a major league player. And you see a guy like Aaron Barrett, who, threw out his arm and basically rehabbed his way back to the major leagues again, how difficult that was, how tough it is when you think a guy's going to be around for a long time and all of a sudden he's traded to another team. Gio Gonzalez was like that to me. I always had a great relationship with him, and all of a sudden he's gone. And the John Lannons, and there's so many guys in this team that I became close with, and realized how difficult it is to get to the major leagues and to stay at the major league level.
You
But
know, I was
just to be around these guys for 12 years was a great honor for me.
For sure. And, I was wondering, Mr. Holiday, because if you look at, the last probably half of your tenure as the pregame and postgame host, 2012 to 2018, I mean, the Nats were a pretty interesting team. They were making the playoffs at least every other year. But you look at those formative years of when you were covering the team. I mean, I remember in 2008 and 2009, the team won 59 games. As a broadcaster who covers the team, I mean, how do you describe what that's like? And how do you get yourself prepared and get up for, covering a team that, quite frankly, wasn't good day in and day out for a couple of years?
Well, those are the years when Masson was also just getting underway. So there was a new network, and we had to get people familiar with what Masson was, where it was on the dial. And they didn't win a lot of games, as you just mentioned. So it's not for us to criticize. It's a new ball club. It's going to have growing pains. And it was almost comical in a way that we were able to get through so many shows. And Ray and I always talked about that. We've been there for the good times, and boy, we were there for the bad times. Not the bad times, but I guess we were there for the formidable years when they first started off, and how we kind of danced around every show, making excuses for that particular game's loss or how we lost it. Or it was very, very, it wasn't tough doing shows because we both loved doing the shows. It was tough to make people understand that it's going to take time to develop a good organization, and it's going to take time to get a winning habit in Washington, and it did. And then when it started to get better and things started to fall the way it should, then you got to find out, how can you get over the hump? How can you win the division? How can you get to the World Series? And that's the tough thing. So the early days were challenging without question, but they were a lot of fun as well. We would do games. I remember doing games on the West Coast, and those games are over like 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning. And you wonder who the heck is staying up to watch a post-game show when the Nationals have just got beat by the Dodgers by 13 runs, or the Giants have beat them at 24-9 or something like that. But you'd be surprised how many people stuck with them. And the National fans were diehard fans from the very get-go, the first couple of years. And that I thought was very, very nice, that they would stick with them. They knew the best was yet to come, and they enjoyed it as much as we did.
For sure. And, you already alluded to it, but what's your relationship like with Mr. Knight? I mean, you guys were together for 12 years. You probably
Yeah.
spend more time with each other than, just about anybody really in your family. And I'm sure you guys keep in touch today. I mean, what was that relationship like working with him every day, seemed like, for 12 years?
Well, he was the best. He was the star of the show because he played in the major leagues. He was the MVP of the World Series. He was an all-star third baseman. He was a manager with Cincinnati. He was a hitting coach. He was a bench coach. He did everything. He knew more baseball than anybody in the organization that wasn't a ball player or a coach or a manager. And just to rely upon Ray, I don't think he never knew Billy, he never knew what I was going to throw at him. And even if I threw some dumb comments to him or made some ridiculous statement, he would always turn that into something positive. And then during the break, he'd say to me, "What the hell were you talking about?" and we could laugh about it. I said, "Well, I thought it'd be a good question to ask you." But he would never, ever embarrass me by saying something like that. He would always answer anything I threw at him. He was great at demonstrations. And I've often said to people, he's probably the best partner I've ever had for an extended period of time. We're together 162 games. I've had great partners in basketball and football, but that doesn't cover 162 games. And for him to be as good as he was and as nice as he was off the air, I think that's what people remember most about Ray. They really enjoyed his relationship with the fans, that he was one of them. And if the Nationals got beat and we came on the air to do our post game, you knew immediately that he was not happy and he felt bad. But he never criticized. He would question a lot, but he would never criticize. And he could question because he's been there. He knew exactly what a Ryan Zimmerman was going through, or the manager was going through. He could relate to all that. Fabulous, fabulous partner. We still keep in touch. We talk, a couple of times a week. And he's down in Albany, Georgia, where he grew up. He's never left there. He's always lived there, and he's doing well.
That's great to hear, and please convey my best wishes to him as well.
I'll do that.
Mr. Holliday, we could spend, all day talking about your illustrious career. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, but I did want to go back to a specific moment in your career. And for those who don't know, I mean, you've been a disc jockey all over the country. You talk about Miami, Perry, Georgia, Rochester, New York, San Francisco, and now in Washington, D.C. You also were in Cleveland for a while. And that's where I wanted to go because you were the PA announcer for the Cleveland Browns the game after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And I've heard that you had an interesting story about that game as the PA announcer, and Art Modell, the original owner of the Browns before he moved the team to Baltimore. But what do you remember about that game, that first one after, unfortunately, when President Kennedy was assassinated?
Well, I think, first of all, we wondered if they were going to play. We figured they were not going to play. But the commissioner, Pete Rozelle, at the time said, yes, we're going to play games on Sunday. And Mr. Modell called me and he said, Johnny, there is so much unrest in this country of what's happened to our president, including here in Cleveland. I'd like to have you if you do your best not to mention the word Dallas. And I said, okay. He said, just call them Cowboys or call them anything, but don't mention the word Dallas. So I did that the entire game. I never mentioned the word Dallas. It was always Cowboys, or I think they were wearing like silver and blue uniforms. I would say that, second down for the silver and blue at the 22-yard line. And we did the public address announcing from the field. So wherever the ball was, that's where I was when I did it for the 3 years that I was in Cleveland. But that was the most unusual game that I've ever done as far as PA work is concerned. And I did it, and I got through the entire game, but it wasn't easy because a lot of times I would start to say, penalty against the Cowboys, and you catch yourself in mid-sentence, but I got through it, and it turned out okay.
That's definitely an interesting story to hear. And of course, like I mentioned, you've been a top 40 disc jockey all around the country. Who's the best musician or a band that you've got to meet over your illustrious career?
Well, the Beatles, probably. I'd say the Beatles. I met them in New York. And then I emceed the last concert they had in San Francisco together. And we sat in the Giants clubhouse. It was at Candlestick Park in August of 1966. And I sat in the clubhouse with the guys talking just like you and I are now, Billy, same thing, and having Cokes and sandwiches before they went on. And they were just the nicest, most unaffected superstars you could ever meet. But that was just one guy. I mean, just one group. Individuals that I still keep in touch with, guys like Bobby Vinton, Guys like Neil Sedaka, who wrote so many great million sellers. Neil Diamond. Used to play basketball with Neil at the YMCA in New York City when I was a disc jockey up there. Sly Stone and I were good friends. Sly from the Family Stone from San Francisco. There's a lot of artists that I was really close with over the years, but I don't think anything can take away him seeing that Beatles concert.
You know, you've had a great career. That honestly might top number one for me when you talk about all the stories and all the people and the teams you've covered throughout your entire career. Mr. Holliday, you have been so gracious with your time with me today. So I just have one final question for you. Like I
Sure.
mentioned, I mean, you've done everything, there can be in your career. And I think you're a great example of you've got to be able to branch out and try a bunch of different things, not just sports, not just DJing and music. Is there anything that you wish that you could have done in your career? I mean, I'm sure that, in your career, there's probably not too many regrets, but is there anything, it might have been nice to cover that sporting event or maybe get to meet this musician? Anything you wish you could have done in your great career?
I don't think so, Billy. I think everything that I've been able to do is basically being at the right place at the right time. One thing I've always told young broadcasters like yourself is if you're ever offered an opportunity to do something, even though you've never done it before, don't say no. Say, yeah, I can do that. And then worry later on, I've never done that before. How am I going to do that? Because there's a whole bunch of things that I've been able to do over the years. And I had no experience, but I knew if I was given the opportunity, I could do it as well as anybody else. And if you say no, then somebody else is going to get that assignment and you're left on the outside. I did boxing. I did the Masters golf tournament. I did the Kentucky Derby. I did Olympics for ABC, winter and summer, for the 8 years that they had them. And it's been a magnificent, magnificent career for me. And I feel fortunate to have done a lot of different things. But as you mentioned at the top of the comment, be versatile, be able to do a lot of different things. I branched out into television. I branched out into voiceover work, to narrations, to network announcing, to theater. All these things are all offshoots of just being on the air as a disc jockey. But I wanted to do more than that. I just didn't want to play records, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. I thought I could do more than that. And I've been lucky to do it and lucky to continue to still do it. And I've been very, very lucky along the way.
That's definitely a great piece of advice. And I certainly hope you're on the mic for the Terps till the end of time. But Mr. Holliday, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Billy, thank you very much for having me on your show and nothing but the best of luck to you.
Appreciate it. That is Mr. Johnny Holliday, the longtime voice of the Maryland Terps. He's been a top 40 disc jockey as well, the former pregame host and postgame host of the Washington Nationals. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.